if we keep doing this podcast and we keep having guests that know more about historical periods, I'm going to actually learn European history eventually. Welcome to Screens of the Stone Age, the podcast where scientists review movies about prehistoric people. My name is Josh Lindell. I'm a grad student studying Neanderthal teeth, and I'm here with...
I'm Dr. Kimberly Plomp. I am a bioarchaeologist. I study the human skeleton, health and disease, and evolution.
And I'm Dr. Brian Buchanan. I'm a landscape archaeologist focused on the landscapes of Roman and early medieval Britain.
Thanks for joining us today, Brian. Brian, you're filling in, of course, for our regular co-host, Ross, who is still away. You've chosen a movie from 2004 called King Arthur. When I started watching this movie, I was like, I think I've seen this movie. And then about after the second act, I'm like, I don't remember any of this. So either I haven't seen it or I turned it on and didn't finish it at some point in my youth. But this is, again, not a prehistoric movie, so it's out of my area of expertise. Hopefully you can teach us something about King Arthur or about the Roman Empire or about the Anglo-Saxons or about one of the many other groups that are mentioned in this movie. But could we start off by having you summarize this movie for our listeners who may not have seen it before?
Sure. So when Kim asked me to kind of fill in on this, and she's like, pick a movie, I remembered this one. I don't know why. I watched this movie, as she says, 2004. That was like the days of like Gladiator and Lord of the Rings. And I went to see this movie thinking, oh, it'll be something similar to this. This was before I was even studying Roman and early medieval. And I thought at the time, what the heck was that? And I thought this might be a good one for us to review, even though I know you all are much more focused on prehistory. So the whole idea of this movie, I think, is to give a more realistic take on the mythology of King Arthur. So they're placing Arthur into the late Roman period, right? The transition into the early medieval period. And there's a lot of scholars that actually think that that's where some of this mythology came from. So there's a little bit of like, okay, they're thinking about this, but I don't know if you all, I wrote down the title page that came up because I had to pause it because they immediately go, historians agree that the classical 15th century tale of King Arthur and his knights rose from a real hero who lived 1,000 years earlier in a period called the Dark Ages, which as an early medievalist already got my hackles up. And then it said, recently discovered archaeological evidence sheds light on his true identity, which is never touched on again. It was just, there's some archaeology. So then they start to talk about Sarmatia, which the Romans conquered, and then they apparently took knights from Sarmatia and sent them to Britain. And there is a little bit of trueness here in that Sarmatia was a region. The Romans did encounter them. They did have cavalry that was put into the Roman army, and we do think some of them served in Britannia. But the whole idea of calling them knights was, the term knights in Europe isn't used until the 11th century. So already we're getting into interesting historical fallacies. But the whole plot of this is that all the knights are supposed to serve for 15 years under this Roman kind of commander, Arthur, and it just tries to break down some of the mythology and present it as like a true story that happened as the Romans are leaving and the Saxons are invading. And that's a lot of the general plot of them. Very early 2000s, ultra violent, which I kind of forgot about that watching this, and trying to give some trueness to the mythology of Arthur. So I guess is that a good enough kind of baseline for us to start chatting about that?
Yeah, I feel like, because again, I don't know anything about Rome, but we have covered Rome in movies. We watched Attila, I think is one where we covered ancient Rome. I don't know anything about the Anglo-Saxons, although we did just on our last episode do The Dig, which is about an Anglo-Saxon burial. We have a group in this movie called the Woads, which I believe are based on the Picts.
Yeah.
And we've covered a movie about Pictish archaeology. I think that was Saving Christmas Spirit, which was a Hallmark style archaeology Christmas movie set in Scotland.
Was that the one where they ended up in Iceland? I listened to you guys do that one, and that one cracked me up. I thought that was a great episode.
That's the
Or was
Christmas
that a different
Quest
one?
with
Oh, that was a
Lacey
Christmas Quest.
Chabert, I
Okay.
think. Very similar kind of movie. I don't believe we've ever covered the Sarmatians before. I'm vaguely familiar with them because I studied in Belgrade very briefly, and somebody was working on some Sarmatian material at the time, but I didn't know who they were at that point in my life, so I know almost nothing about the Sarmatians. So yeah, let's get into all these details. I'm sure we've got a lot of factual inaccuracies that we can sort of list off, and I assume we're going to have some chronological errors based on some of my research behind this.
Well, let's start with the chronology. They immediately say 452 AD. Everything we know historically, 410 is when Roman the Emperor Honorius basically says, you're on your own. Okay. So like up until the end of the 4th century, you're starting to see Roman power decline in Britain. Okay. Now, this is where there's some interesting kind of bleeding over in the fact that we think, thanks to some archaeology that's happened on Hadrian's Wall, that Hadrian's Wall fortifications are occupied long after that period. It almost appears that there might be some of, I think Boers says this. He said, oh, I'm not leaving. I'll set up my own little kingdom here on Hadrian's Wall. And we actually think that happened. There was excavations along the wall that showed early medieval wooden structures that get placed right into Roman fortifications in the 5th century. So that part's a little bit like, okay, maybe. But then let's go back to the Sarmatians that apparently have very French names. Everybody's Lancelot and, Guinevere's a Woad. And I thought that was all quite interesting choices. But the whole idea of they have to serve 15 years. Well, the Roman auxiliaries and the Roman legions had to serve 25 years before their term was up. So already they're just inventing kind of a number there, which that's fine. You got to do it for a movie, I guess. And then they're up on Hadrian's Wall wearing, and I'm not a Roman military historian, but they're wearing the classic like Roman armor that you see in a lot of Hollywood movies that was probably from about 200 years earlier than that time period was. So getting a little bit there. So they start to bring in real people. Bishop Germanus was a real person. Arthur was apparently really drawn to the kind of preachings of this Roman philosopher Pelagius, who lived much earlier in time than they were. They basically said he was alive at the same time, but he died, I think, in 411. So they're getting the chronology all over the place. But I can forgive chronology. But as I said, I'm a landscape archaeologist, and I think that was the biggest issues I had with this movie that drove me absolutely nuts. Was
what would you tell?
Okay, Hadrian's Wall. Okay, Hadrian's Wall, for those of you that don't know, stretches from the north of the Irish Sea. It was built to basically demarcate the northern frontier of the Roman Empire. Okay, named after Emperor Hadrian, who commissioned it. And we do think it had some defensive function, but it also probably operated almost like the Canadian-US border. It's a way to kind of check where people are going, check trade, things like that. The Saxons, or the Anglo-Saxons, were a seafaring people that migrated to England. You can sail around the wall. Why they were marching on the wall, I have no idea. Also, why they were marching from what is modern-day Scotland when apparently they landed in Kent in southern England at the invitation of the people living in Britain to defend them from the Picts.
Right.
It was just throwing all these things all together. So, Kim, kind of that area a little bit from living over there, I guess. But
yeah, it's a nice hiking area.
Yeah, it's nice. They got some of that looking, maybe what it might have looked like, Hadrian's Wall itself, and the fact that there's fortifications right along the wall there. But then the geography got even weirder when they spent 2 days traveling north to rescue. It's almost like a Magnificent Seven kind of plot where they have one more mission. We're getting the gang back together and they have to go save somebody at a villa that's apparently in the middle of Scotland, when the furthest villa was in Yorkshire, about 100 miles south of Hadrian's Wall. So there was all kinds of interesting kind of ideas happening here.
Yeah, I guess that's, potentially the biggest plot hole, because I don't know that much about this period, but my first question was, why would there be a Roman villa north of Hadrian's Wall where they have to go rescue somebody? Why would they set up there in the first place?
Mhm.
And so it seems like that is just implausible altogether, right?
Yeah, I mean, you can make an argument that, like, for part of the Roman period, they were up in Scotland. It's not that the Romans weren't in Scotland, but by 450, when, the Romans aren't really in power anyway there, but let's say the early 5th century, there's nobody living in a villa that far north in Scotland or Switzerland, because that one scene in this like mountainous landscape on an icy lake doesn't really happen too much in the UK. I think they wandered over to that was the other thing. The Saxons, I thought, were very much portrayed as Vikings. That was the vibe I was getting from them.
Yeah, that's what I thought, that they seemed like. I was kind of confused and even had to go back and listen to see if they had tried to shove in Vikings somewhere.
I mean, they even have Skard, who is Scandinavian. I believe he's from Denmark, but I could be wrong on that, playing the Saxon kind of guy. The Saxons were Anglo-Scandinavian, okay, but like they were very Viking forward, I think, in this movie. So
yeah, it's hard to know where to start talking about this because it mixes and matches so many different things that I barely know anything about. But I mean, one of the really simple things we can talk about, that we talk about all the time, I wonder if we have a bingo spot for this one. We play a game we play Caveman Movie Bingo, but we've got a few, archaeology or history things in there as well. One of the things that we see a lot is accents that are out of place, and most movies just put a British accent because everything in the past has a British accent, right? In an American movie. This one's a little bit unique because it's happening in Britain, and our heroes all have British accents, but the heroes are mainly Sarmatians,
right.
which are a nomadic people that originated in Iran and are their land, Sarmatia, is like Eastern Europe. So it's pretty weird that the people with the primarily British accents are the Sarmatians. The Romans, some of them seem to have Italian accents, except for Arthur, who I guess Arthur is actually from Britain, so I guess that's why he gets his British accent. But then we have the Saxons have Scandinavian accent, but his son has a German accent.
Yes.
So if you're a good guy, it doesn't matter where you come from, you've got a British accent. If you're a bad guy, you can have any accent, and maybe they're loosely inspired by the place where you come from, but they're not too consistent.
It's kind of like the flip of Star Wars, where all the bad guys are British accents and everybody else can talk however they want. But
yeah.
Keira Knightley had her very posh. Yeah, she was a very posh British accent, and you're like, you could have, done a little bit better than that. Although I don't really like her as an actor. But she's probably the reason why I hadn't seen this movie before.
I think I was drawn to it at the time because I'm like, oh, cool, Roman stuff. I saw Gladiator like 3 years before. That was a lot of fun, and then I didn't remember any of this movie. I just remembered it was set on Hadrian's Wall, and I'm like, well, I do that. Why don't we chat about that? I guess.
It was mostly fighting. It was mostly battle scenes, which I find very boring. Like there's a point when you're like, yeah, okay, like we get it, and then they go on again and do another battle scene.
Yeah, they didn't really flesh out the characters very well. We were supposed to, I think, feel for these guys a lot, but they didn't flesh that out that well, which was weird because actually you look at the cast, and I kept having to look back at going like, wait, is that Mads Mikkelsen there? It's like they had really good people in a lot of these roles that it could have been kind of good even with all the historical inaccuracies, but it was just kind of run of the mill, I think, at the end of the day.
Yeah, it felt very like cookie cutter war movie, right? Like my dad would love it. He'd watch it every Christmas type of thing. And you're just like, there's nothing new to it.
Yeah. And it's funny because I think that they were trying not to make a typical movie, because they do King Arthur, but then they reinvent the whole story ostensibly to be more archaeologically accurate, even though I would like to know how, if you think this is in any way more archaeologically accurate than any other story about it. But then, like, so they do things like, Merlin's not really a magician. There's no magic in this. We do have him pulling Excalibur from a stone sort of off to the side in a flashback, right? And also I read somewhere that the director and the writer sort of downplayed the love story and the sort of love triangle with Lancelot because they read that there was not really any historical basis for that, and so it seemed like maybe they were trying to make it more historically accurate, but just from the way the dates don't align, are we supposed to believe in this movie when the Romans leave Hadrian's wall and when the Saxons are coming, is this supposed to be when the Roman Empire retreats from Britain in 410, or is that supposed to be that event, the Roman Empire pulling out of Britain? Or
that's the way it was portrayed.
Like. Yeah,
it was almost like they were end. Oh, let's run away from the wall. We're done with Britain. See you later. And
yeah.
That's a really good point for the discussions of this period, in that we have a historical document basically from the emperor saying you're on your own, basically in 410. But a lot of scholars don't think that people living in 450 all of a sudden thought themselves they weren't Roman anymore. Probably going up into the 6th century, they might have thought they were still Roman, even though they were no longer kind of an official province. And that gets to questions of identity. Like, when do you feel Roman? Do you feel Roman? I don't think the people that were Roman had Italian accents, and the people that were British had British accents. They all probably had accents we don't even recognize now, right? But that part is kind of interesting in that, when the Saxons come in, we do have a lot of questions. I mean, it is called the proverbial Dark Ages for a lot of reasons. And one of those is we don't have a lot of historical documentation for the 5th and 6th centuries, even up into the 7th century. It's often called a proto-historic period. It's prehistoric, historic archaeology, and the fact that we have 3 main sources, one of whom was buried in Durham Cathedral, where Kim and I did our PhDs, which was the Venerable Bede. And then there was another monk known as Gildas. He was living in the late Roman period. His was very fire and brimstones. The Saxons are coming and they destroyed everything. Bede was, from an Anglo-Saxon quote unquote lineage, if you want to use that terminology. His was a lot more nuanced view, but we don't have a lot of historical documentation for this period. We don't know.
No.
That's one of the things that drives archaeologists in this period, is understanding how it transforms from a Roman province to a series of early medieval kingdoms, or a lot of early medieval kingdoms that divide up the whole island.
My research.
So, in a way, they're going that way.
I was just saying, I'm just plugging my own research. I did a paper that looked at cranial morphology, the base of the skull, in terms of population relatedness. And our findings seem to indicate that Anglo-Saxons, it wasn't a complete replacement, that it was more a culturalization, indigenous Britons adopting the Anglo-Saxon culture, and it was a lot more peaceful and a lot more, 50% populations. And so it wasn't this complete replacement of the Britons.
Yeah.
But it wasn't either, it didn't seem like it's either also, only the soldiers or only the higher, wealthy people are Anglo-Saxon and the rest are Britons. So it seemed to be pretty even population, just normal migration of people coming in.
So that struck a point, Kim. Thank you for that, because that reminded me of something else in this movie I really didn't like, which was it was early when you see the Saxons raiding, and they're one guy looks like he was attempting to have his way with a local woman. They're like, oh, we don't pollute our bloodlines with this. And it was almost are we leading into modern 20th century American tropes of Anglo-Saxonism? Which is where a lot in my field, there's been issues using that term over the last decade, and a lot of debates that I don't want to go into right now. But it was a weird kind of purity, white knight purity thing that they were portraying. I was and they never touched on it again. I'm what was that? I thought that was really out of left field, but maybe I'm looking at it in 2025 eyes versus 2004 eyes.
But it's really strange. So when I was publishing that paper, me and my co-authors had a big discussion about whether we use the term Anglo-Saxon because of the co-opting of it into these racist ideologies of nowadays. And so we didn't want our research to be use in any way to support that. But then we thought, the results really don't support this idea of the superior group of people or coming in and being whatever, right? Like our research just supports normal human migration, acclimatization, everybody, like there's not even one population that you could point at as Anglo-Saxon, right? So we were worried, but we just went with it. And then I got called, it's a horrible term and I hate saying it, but I got called a libtard on Twitter. So like, that's why my research went viral, was the right wing hated it. And I was like, you know what, if that's the attention that we get from it, that's fine. As long as they don't like my results, I'm doing good. So that's fine.
I remember that, Kim. I'd forgotten about that until you said that. Yeah, that was horrible.
I mean, if they had been sharing my paper and been like, read this help, blah, 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 I would have been like, no, retract the paper. So yeah, I'm glad that they didn't like my research. Don't want to be trending with that group.
Well, maybe this is a good segue to talk about all of the different cultural groups that we have in the movie. And like movie-wise, it's too many because I'm an archaeologist and I was struggling to understand who is who and what their relationships were.
Okay, so it wasn't just me. I was like, I'm getting really confused. Yeah.
We have the Romans, which is easy to understand. We have the Sarmatians, who they explain who they are at the beginning, and it's just like a few of our main characters in their like tight little group, so that's fine. We have the Woads, which we've talked about Woad before. Woad is not a group, but they're based on the Picts, I'm pretty sure. But Woad is a plant which creates a blue dye, and the Woads in the movie dye their skin blue. Maybe we can spend some time later talking about, or now talking about who the Picts were. The Picts are another mysterious group from Scotland that we don't know too much about, but they allegedly painted their skin blue or tattooed themselves or both or something like that. So it seems pretty clear that these people are based on the Picts. And we have the Anglo-Saxons, who are an invading force that look like Vikings in this movie. And also, we have just all of the rest of the people. And that's the question that has, like, who is everybody else, right? So I guess what we have is everybody else is just the Romano-British population. We have the wives and children of the soldiers. We have everybody else living around the forts south of the wall, but then the Woads are coming from north of the wall, which would make sense if they're Picts. But then, so it's like, so the Roman Sarmatians are fighting against the Woads. Now the Anglo-Saxons are fighting against the Woads, and now the Anglo-Saxons are fighting against the Romans, and now the Romans are teaming up with the Woads to fight against the Anglo-Saxons. And it all got very confusing to me to figure out who is who, especially since they're all real except for the Woads. I don't know why they had to change it from the Picts, right?
I don't either. That struck me as weird that they decided to just name them that. Again, this goes back to my issues with geography in this movie. So the Picts, we know them from archaeology, and we know them from Roman descriptions. They did not leave written evidence for us of them in this time period. And they're fantastic. I kind of study them tangentially, and I'm always interested in them. They look these amazing carved stone sculpture all over like northern and northeastern Scotland. So not anywhere near Hadrian's Wall. The Picts probably weren't that far south. These were probably native British. So if you were looking just directly north of Hadrian's Wall, there's a number of native British tribal groups that, let's just call them Picts for the sake of this podcast, but they weren't actually Picts. They were Brittonic, from the best of my understanding. I got confused on who they were, but again, this gets down to, I think they were just like, ooh, Hadrian's Wall, that's a military fortification. Let's have the Saxons march against that, even though that makes no sense whatsoever. One of the things we think actually did happen is we have some writings that the Saxons were invited in, the Anglo-Saxons were invited in to defend the Romano-British population against Pictish incursions from the north. So they weren't invading from the north. They were actually defending Hadrian's Wall against the Woads, if we want to call them that from this view. But why let that get in the way of a good story? I don't want to go right to the end of the movie, but I think we should talk about the fact that Arthur and Guinevere get married in a henge of some sort by Merlin. And I think we have to put this in the context of what's happening in America at the time. This is 2004, and I don't know how many times I heard in this movie this was all about freedom, and I got flashbacks to like freedom fries from right around the Iraqi invasion in America, and we're fighting for freedom to then make this guy a king over all of us. Really struck me as a weird kind of. I wasn't quite sure what we were doing with that.
Yeah, the guy who was Roman, who was the ruling force, right?
Yeah. But yeah, there's a lot of people in this movie, a lot of different groups, which in some ways maybe we can admire because it would have been a complex area. There would have been a lot of people interacting and probably things would have been up in the air, but why let that get in the way of a good story, I guess, or a bad story?
Exactly.
Okay, so here's maybe a big question. If the after Rome has sort of officially left Britain, the probably still culturally Romano-British population invites the Anglo-Saxons to help defend them against the Picts. When does the stories about King Arthur, where is he probably more likely to fall in this? Because the idea that King Arthur was a Roman soldier struck me like I don't know anything, and maybe we can get into the actual mythology of King Arthur because I know nothing about that. But I would never have imagined King Arthur as a Roman soldier. And so why couldn't they have just made the movie King Arthur is an Anglo-Saxon who defends southern Britain against the invading Picts from the north, and then you just write out the whole Roman Empire and you've got a much easier story with good guys and bad guys, right? So like, does it make sense? Is there any real reason why we would think King Arthur was a British or not a British soldier, a Roman soldier?
I don't think so. Ryan?
So I'm not an expert on King Arthur whatsoever, and King Arthur I think is a mythological figure. There's been a lot of work by early medieval scholars talking about where the myth of King Arthur comes from. Was King Arthur a real person? Where was he? There's a lot of linking him down to like the Cornwall area. Potentially he was that kind of region. There's some linking him up to this part of the world, Hadrian's Wall area. I mean, every part of Britain actually kind of claims him mythologically. I mean, if you've ever been to Edinburgh, Arthur's seat is right next to it, and there's linkages there to Arthur as well. So it's a great question. Like, what time period would he be in? But let's actually talk about like how we know about King Arthur, and that is written in the 15th century. Like, La Morte d'Arthur is all about like chivalry and this idea of in that time period trying to reclaim that knights were chivalrous figures, and that's the whole point of like the Round Table and the quests that these knights go on and courtly love and all of like what knights are about and chivalry and the idea of the Round Table. That's written much later on, and I guess that's where that title is. Where does the myth of King Arthur come from? Well, it probably did come from stories getting told about heroic figures from the quote unquote Dark Ages, and by the time they get up to the 14th or 15th century, I can't remember when it's written. I think I've said 15th because that's what they said on the title page, but I'm not sure that's actually correct. It's transforms as all good mythological kind of stories do, word of mouth stories. So I don't fault them for that. In fact, it's kind of a unique idea. I just wish they would have maybe done it a bit better. But
yeah, I think they could have stuck a lot more to the myth and made a better movie than doing this just confusing. It's like they couldn't decide who the enemy was.
Did either of you seen the Green Knight a few years ago that came out?
No.
It was really well done, and that was very much a kind of avant-garde, focusing on the mythology of the quest of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, which is an ancient kind of old English kind of fable. That was a different way of leaning into it. It was actually leaning into what the mythology is and understanding what these myths are trying to tell us, which is, kind of almost like the idea of like the hero's quest and what you have to go through. Whereas this was like almost trying to give us the hero's quest, but it was more, it couldn't decide if it was going to be like a Magnificent Seven buddy movie or a historical documentary or a war movie. It just seemed like it was very disjointed as it went through different parts of the movie itself.
To me, it kind of felt like they wanted to make a movie with lots of sword fighting, and then they just threw in a story in between to try and connect the war scenes. That's what it felt like.
Right.
Well, I actually read that initially they had planned this movie to be like an R-rated, really bloody war movie. And because it's Disney, they pushed back and they're like, we want this to be a PG-13. So they had them digitally remove most of the blood.
Right.
And I think that probably really set the tone a lot more. And then I also read that 13 days before the official US release, at some test screenings, they realized it wasn't playing right. They wanted to add a little bit more humor. So there's a scene where the knights are all sitting around a fire and they're talking about how, I can't remember, the bald guy reveals that he only named his first kid and then the rest of them just have numbers after that.
Yeah.
Apparently that scene was reshot like 2 weeks before the movie was officially released in the US. So I would not be surprised if these are some of the reasons why there's some maybe tonal inconsistency, or it doesn't feels like it doesn't know what it wants to be.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was funny. He was like, I like number 3. He's funky.
I got a couple of little inaccuracies to throw out here. First of all, we have trebuchets in the final scene of this movie. We've had trebuchets come up before. Trebuchets are a sort of advanced type of catapult. There's a couple of different types. The traction trebuchet, I don't really know what that means, but apparently it requires people, like human power, to make it work. That was invented in China in the 4th century BCE, but the type we see in this movie is the counterweight trebuchet, where it's got this sort of big weight that pulls the arm down and it's got a sling on the other end. That wasn't invented until the 12th century CE in the Mediterranean area. So we are a few centuries ahead of time with trebuchets there. Those couldn't have really existed. Another thing, I don't know if you caught this one, but when the Woads first attack Arthur and his crew and then don't kill them, but they just sort of encircle them so they can have a conversation, they're shooting like arrows with like barbed wire so they can make weird barbed wire fences. I assume that there is absolutely no historical basis for a weapon like that, because I've done a little bit of archery. I don't know how you would shoot an arrow trailing barbed wire. I also don't know where you would get barbed wire at this time. I don't know when barbed wire was invented, but it looks like barbed wire. I don't know what else you could call it, if you guys noticed that. It's pretty quick on screen.
I noticed it because I kept wondering, like, why don't you just ride through these vines? And then they looked very barbed wire-esque. So barbed wire, 19th century. So,
yeah,
not a little bit out of date. Yeah. The crossbow.
Crossbows. Okay, tell me.
So crossbows are somewhat old, and the Romans had something called a ballista, which is kind of like a crossbow, but basically what the one guy shot into Lancelot looked like a very medieval looking crossbow. And it also played on the whole tropes of like, oh, the longbows are awesome. They're way better than crossbows, which is, goes to like, at the Battle of Agincourt and like these ideas that the longbow always beats it. But the longbow wasn't around then either. And there was just a lot of those kind of inaccuracies. I think the Roman armor, those kind of like interlocking plates, that's from like the 1st and 2nd century. By the time you get to this period, they're dressed in like basically chainmail style dress, and they have pants on in this period. The Roman military, they don't have that like kind of skirt look anymore. So some other fun inaccuracies for you. But I can almost forgive the Hollywood designer some of that, because it's almost like that kind of crest thing there screams Roman, you're Roman, and you have to kind of identify, I guess, on screen who's who. But yeah, I want to love a movie with Hadrian's Wall in it, because I love Hadrian's Wall, but this was not that one.
It was probably good for, just a popcorn movie when you're not, want to turn your brain off and just enjoy stuff. But yeah.
I think my favorite was whenever the Saxon guy was on screen, Skarsgård. Like, he just ate up every scene he was in. It reminded me a little, he was like channeling Alan Rickman from Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. He was kind of giving that like, I'm just gonna be the most evil person ever in this screen, and And I enjoyed him, but yeah.
Yeah, it's a really star-studded movie. Surprisingly, like you said, you keep watching, you keep noticing somebody else. I don't know if you guys know Till Schweiger. He was the son of the Anglo-Saxon guy. From what I've heard, he's like the most famous actor in Germany.
Oh, I don't know.
He's been in a couple other things. I think he was in Inglourious Bastards.
Oh yeah, you're right. He was. He was like a bigger guy then. Oh my gosh, I didn't even put that together. Yeah.
Yeah. He is apparently really famous in Germany. The thing I know him best from is one of my favorite movies, SLC Punk, where he plays this sort of mentally unstable drug dealer, and he's very funny in that. But it's kind of funny to see him in this role when I know him better from more modern things. And I know that he's a very famous German actor who I think thinks kind of highly of himself, to see him as this bald, sort of sniveling villain in this one.
Yeah, that was the thing that struck me after watching him. Like, yeah, I like Clive Owen. I mean, Children of Men is an amazing movie. They're like, these are some really good actors, and it was just like they almost wasted some really good actors. They could have had this much more of a drama, and it almost seemed like they wanted to have it as a drama sometimes. And then they were like, yeah, but let's swing some swords and blow things up, which doesn't make sense either. But we're gonna blow things up, and yeah. I think, Kim, you got it right, like a popcorn movie to watch on like a Saturday afternoon kind of thing.
Yeah. Just like we say with most of the movies, don't try and learn history from it.
No, go read a book. One other thing that they threw in, I have to say, there was a brief discussion when the Saxons were marching on the wall and they talked about the Ninth Legion, like stationed on the wall. I don't know if you guys know the tropes of the Ninth Legion. The Ninth Legion is like, it disappeared from the historical record in like 200s because it was up in Scotland.
Yes. And I have heard conspiracy theories about this.
Right. There was a movie a few years ago called The Lost Legion with like Channing Tatum going up there to try and find it. I don't know too much about it, but like some people have argued like the Legion just disbanded and like the soldiers went and joined other legions, or they went to station somewhere. We've lost some of the kind of recording on them. But I thought it was weird that they were like, yeah, we're just going to talk about the Ninth Legion is now stationed on the wall in 300 years later or something. Just throw that in there as a little conspiracy theory egg for the people that know what the Ninth Legion is. But
interesting.
I had to throw that in there too. Kim's looking at me like, that's too in the weeds, Brian. What are you doing?
Yeah. No, I don't know this stuff very well.
Into the Weeds is good. That's why we need guests to teach us things on these non-prehistoric movies when we do them. Okay, a couple of extra things I got on my notes here. One of them is we have this real big, pretty cool scene where they're having a battle on the middle of a frozen lake, which they arrived at a day or two after leaving a totally green Roman villa. I'm not sure. They were specifically traveling east, and of course then they have to get south. They specifically said they have to go east around the mountains, and then they've got to get south because that's where the wall is.
Right.
I have not been to Britain, but you guys have. Is there anywhere in Britain where you can walk from a green, not frozen area to an entirely frozen lake that you could have a battle on within a couple of days? I'm not sure about the timeline, but it didn't take them too long to walk to the villa from the wall.
The only place I could think would be like the mountains of Scotland, but I don't know. The landscape didn't look right either, though.
No, like I kind of joked about before. It looked like they went for a walk to Switzerland and fought in a frozen or up in like Sweden or something like that. And I kept trying to place myself from what I know in the geography. There's an area in the Scottish borders called the what is it called? Well, they're not quite highlands, but they're like an upland area. More likely they would be wandering through boggy muck and getting stuck in like bogs than they would be in a frozen lake in that area. Especially because the Roman period was slightly warmer than our period of time. Well, maybe not at the moment, but the Roman period was a bit warmer. They grew wine in England during the Roman period. So wine grapes. They didn't grow wine, they grew grapes for the wine. So I don't think they would have a frozen lake that you could march an army across. Let's say that.
No, and it has to be really cold to get frozen that thick. Like in Canada now, when I was young, we used to get parts of the lake that would freeze so that we could walk on it. Probably not an army, but kids. But now we don't. So it doesn't even get cold enough in Canada now to really allow that type of, or at least not where I'm from, that type of thickness of ice.
I think your main point, Josh, of it was green in one area and there was a frozen lake at Day's March. It's not that there couldn't be a frozen lake up in Scotland or something in the Highlands, but you wouldn't be able to walk from like really green, verdant looking scenery right to a frozen lake a little bit later. So, yeah.
And then back again, because once they get back to the wall, they have a battle on a green plain, right? So it seems like it started snowing and that little drop in temperature for a day was enough to freeze the lake like 6 inches thick. And then it all melted as soon as the weather warmed up.
Yeah, you're right. Because I think when they're down by the wall, I think even the trees had the leaves on them still, and they were all like green leaves.
Yeah.
So, yeah. But seasons are something that you don't have to worry about either when you're kind of talking about the past.
I actually read that ironically they filmed this in Ireland and apparently it was a heat wave. It was like they're breaking heat records while they were filming it and then they're like blowing fake snow on them to make it look like winter.
How'd they get the fake lake then? They just made like an ice rink?
I don't think that they were really walking on ice. I think that they were walking on maybe like a parking lot that they covered in snow or something. I don't know how much of this was, digital
CGI
animation either.
Yeah, I don't know.
Spoiler alert, Hadrian's Wall doesn't look like that anymore.
Well, the wall itself was a really constructed wall because they didn't want to use computer animation for the wall. So they really did build a short section of wall. Presumably they built it out of like wood and plaster and not actually stone. But the wall that they use in the movie is a practical effect and not digital. But I'm not sure how much else was digital in the movie. That's one thing. It's from 2004. I didn't notice anything that was like glaringly bad CGI. So whatever they did was sort of integrated well, I guess.
But that might explain some things. If they spent a lot of money building Hadrian's Wall and then they had to commit to using the wall a lot for the background of scenes and battles and things like that. Yeah, like going north of the wall, coming back, having a battle at the wall. And I mean, that makes sense that it was practical because you're right, it didn't stick out to me like a lot of movies at that time where it would be kind of poor CGI or something like that. So I guess we'll give them props for that.
Well, speaking of the battle near the wall, the movie does mention in the voiceover at the end that the big battle at the end of the movie is the Battle of Badon Hill, which is a real battle. Does anybody know anything about that?
No.
I did a little research on that. I don't know much about it except for that it was far, far south of Hadrian's Wall.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think the time period wasn't quite correct either. But yeah.
Google says it started in 490 and ended in 516.
Wait,
or it's happened somewhere in between that time period, I think. Okay. That's sort of the bracket.
That makes sense.
I think the reason they did it is because in one of the historical-esque sources about King Arthur, it says that he fought at this battle. So I think that's why they include that in the voiceover at the end, because this is supposed to have been one of the places where King Arthur actually fought. Although that's not new archaeological evidence, that's very old historical evidence that is contested and not necessarily thought to be necessarily true, as far as I can tell.
I mean, one of the things I looked at after I watched this movie earlier today was like the title of like the Reddit theme was, why can't they make a good King Arthur movie? And they referenced this, and there was one a few years ago which I never even heard of. It was like a Guy Ritchie movie on King Arthur.
I'm pretty sure that the Disney one was good.
Oh, Sword in the Stone.
Sword in the Stone.
That's a great movie. Yeah,
that's a great movie. Yeah.
I don't think I've seen it.
What? Oh, you got it. It's classic.
Should we do that one next?
Yeah, if Brian can come back, we can do it again.
I debated telling you guys to do the Robin Hood movie because that's my favorite Disney movie.
The Fox one? We could do Robin Hood
Yes.
Men in Tights. That's a good movie.
Oh, yeah.
Mhm.
I think my favorite King Arthur movie is still Monty Python and the Holy Grail, but they lean into the historical inaccuracies in that one.
So what is the Disney version of King Arthur then? Because I like I said, I can picture the blonde little kid pulling a sword out of a stone. King Arthur pulls a sword out of a stone. He's destined to be king because he pulled a sword out of a stone. How does Guinevere factor in? How does Merlin? How does Lancelot factor in? What is the Disney version of this story? Because I know nothing about King Arthur.
So Merlin is an old man at that time helping Arthur. I don't remember Guinevere. Do you?
Yeah. Arthur's a kid in that. And it's all about him getting the sword, and it almost is like, now you're king, and it like stops there. And then all the big exploits is like not on camera. It's all about like Merlin training Arthur as a boy to become king someday. And if I remember right, he does it by like transforming him into various animals, and right?
Yeah.
Kim,
yeah.
Okay.
No, yeah, because he has to get through the moat, right? And there's the sturgeon in there, and that's scary.
That's right.
And,
he was the fish.
Yeah, I don't really remember. I just remember really enjoying it. But there's there's a bad guy, so I think it's the king at the time is the bad guy, right? And there's a bully there's a big guy who's supposed to be. It's
like who he's the ward of, and he's the squire for like his older brother or something like that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Obviously, we have to watch it again.
Good.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. I think much more historically accurate to the myth of King Arthur in a lot of ways than this movie was. Because this movie is almost like, we're going to present you the true dark story of King Arthur and the real one. And it's like, well, maybe just actually show some of that. That's why people like King Arthur.
It's because of the myth, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think we can talk about that a little bit more. That's what that opening text that you read at the beginning of the episode, that's the work that I think it's doing. It's basically saying, based on a true story, right? Mm-hmm. It says, recently discovered archaeological evidence sheds light on his true identity, but the movie actually is not in any way based on any archaeological evidence that was recently discovered around 2004, is it? Like, was there anything in particular that was discovered in like the late 20th century that would have shed new light on King Arthur?
Not that I know of.
Not off the top of my head. There's always like people talk about Arthur when they're talking about British archaeology of the period. Like there was a book talking about an excavation of an Anglo-Saxon settlement called like The Search for Camelot, but that was almost like they were leading into that kind of trope, as it were, to talk about Arthur, but like how people would have lived in that period kind of thing. I can't think of anything around the late 90s that would have been like, yeah, we found King Arthur, we know where he is now, and here's where he is, and now we'll make a movie about it. But I love that scene. I'm glad they had that title there. I didn't remember that because I'm like, wow, this is really just leaning right into what this podcast is. I think that first title scene.
I love it when I see the word archaeology on the first screen of the movie, and I'm like, okay, fine, we're in the right place for this podcast. I feel like this opening text is basically like the opening text on the movie Fargo that says based on a true story or based on true events, and it's just a lie, right? And so that's what it's doing here. It's like it's setting you up, but then the movie, it sets you up. It's like, oh, they found some new cool archaeological stuff about King Arthur. Let's watch this movie. Then you watch the movie and you're like, oh, this is very different from the Disney movie. It's very grounded. It's not magic. We see the sword and the stone, but it's not really that important, right? And we see the Roman Empire. I know they're real from history. And so I feel like the movie is doing something a lot of the movies we watch do, which is setting the viewer up to be like, this is true history. And now you put this in your brain and you know true history, but it's wrong and it's a lie. And in most of the movies where we watch this, there's something insidious about it. Like we just did Kon-Tiki a while ago. And they, if you know the story of Kon-Tiki, I don't know if you've seen the movie. I think it was from 2014. The story is true and they tell the true story, but they leave out the part where Thor Heyerdahl's theory was wrong. And so if you watch that movie, you get to the end, you're like, wow, he proved that Polynesian people originated from South America, because that's essentially what the movie says. You know, it's what it says without saying it, right? And that's bad in that case, I think.
Mm-hmm.
In this movie, I feel like there's much less at stake to be like, this is a true story, when in actuality it's not. So I don't know if we want to have a little bit of a conversation about, is this okay just because it's not, pushing some sort of bad racist narrative like some of these movies are by lying or by lying by omission? Or is it the same kind of bad thing, but just not as bad implications in this particular case?
I don't think it's as bad, but I think it's just annoying. Like, history in itself is entertaining and cool and fascinating. I don't see why they have to change it from, like, the same with that 300 movie that, taking the coolest story of like essentially almost the coolest story in human history, and then just changing it so much it's not even recognizable and making it into a boring movie, right? Like, I don't think it's as bad as having like the Kon-Tiki one, right? The implications of that. I just think it's known. So I think they could have gone into
him on that.
Yeah. I would have preferred they went with the myth on this one. I think that's a better story. You're right. It's the reason why Deer endured. So just do with that.
Do you think there's something more compelling about a true story? Like with the movie Fargo, where they say it's based on a true story, but that's just a lie. Is this movie like, we're not going to tell the myth, we're going to tell a more grounded story that feels like it could be true, and then we'll hint at the idea that this is actually a true story, because maybe people will feel like a movie is more compelling if it's a true story rather than just another rehashing of the myth.
I don't know. I always like when we don't know, when it could be true, but we don't know. Like, again, this is why we're in research, right? So if they had just said, this is the myth of Arthur, we don't know what's true or not, I think that would, again, been more exciting. Because then you would have been like,
I think the ideas behind this story were actually kind of fun. I like the idea of, I just wish it would have picked one of the threads. Like, is it a buddy movie, like Magnificent Seven movie? Okay, let's just do that and have fun with it. Is it a drama about the end of empire and the beginning of kingdoms and the clash of cultures? Okay, let's make it a drama. Is it if it is just an action movie, let's do good action that actually like builds suspense. It, like Kim said, I think earlier, it was just battle scene after battle scene. It wasn't like good action movies where there's suspense happening as you go, not to go back to Lord of the Rings, but I will, because I do study early medieval period, and I think Tolkien did it better. It's there's suspense when you're watching the Battle of Helm's Deep. Even though I know what's going to happen, there's still like suspense building that doesn't happen in this movie.
Yeah, it's true. And then you care more about the battle then, right? Whereas this time I was like, oh, they're fighting again. And I fast forwarded it because you're like, hit. Okay, that guy did. Hit.
Right. But to get back to your earlier question, Josh, about like, should we care about this? I was struck thinking about Braveheart, because I don't think they're that wildly different in time. Now, Braveheart was like a much better movie in a lot of ways, and I think it won Oscars at the time, and it was much more commercial success. But the historical inaccuracies in it are like amazing. And I'm not an archaeologist at that time period, but like the big one was they weren't wearing kilts at that time. And the Battle of Stirling was actually the Battle of Stirling Bridge, and he didn't have a bridge at all in that scene. And it's just like, but there was like drama in that movie, and there was, there was buildup and things like that you didn't get in this one. And if they maybe, just wasn't as well done of a movie, even though I think the idea could have been actually a fun one. Probably how they got all these actors to sign on for it.
I mean, do you want to be King Arthur? Yes. You want to play Lancelot?
Exactly.
Yes. But
yeah. I guess at least they did have an English guy playing Arthur. That was probably good.
Well, what are our final thoughts on this movie? I think listeners can tell it wasn't a great movie, right?
No, I wouldn't watch it again. I wasn't sad that I had missed it when it came out.
When Kim asked me, like, pick out a movie, and I was like, well, this was on my period, and I remember I didn't like it in 2004, but maybe it's better than I remembered. And it was actually way worse than I remember. So I'm sorry that I made you both watch that.
Oh, no. Don't misunderstand me. It's still better than a lot of them that we watched for this podcast.
But I appreciate that Kim gave you the option to choose a movie, and you chose a movie that you didn't think was very good in your memory, and that's very much in the spirit of this podcast.
I didn't want to choose one that was actually everybody loved, because I feel like that's harder to talk about, isn't it?
There's usually less to talk about, right? Because there's usually, less to complain about. It's the bad movies that we go on and on about. Yeah.
It's easier to review a bad movie, I think. From a picking apart the inaccuracies perspective. Not that that's the only thing we do. Well, Brian, thanks for joining us on the podcast. Do you have any social media or any interesting work that you'd like people to read about?
So I'm a part of the project team, excavating an early medieval royal palace, Gefrin in northern England. And we're going back out there in 3 weeks, so people can find us through the GefrinTrust.org. And I think it's called Gefrin Trust is our Instagram page. And I'm on Bluesky, and Gefrin is Gefrin. It's of the period from this movie. So people come take a look, and we'll probably be posting up some social media stuff, I guess, as we go. I am on Bluesky, but I don't think I've ever posted anything on it. But when I switched from X, I'm on Bluesky, and I am Buchanan. So, but thank you both for the invitation. It was fun.
Well, thanks for accepting.
Yeah, if you'd like to come back and teach us more about the Romans or the Anglo-Saxons or the Picts or the Sarmatians or any other time in British history, that would be great.
I mean, I think if we ever want to do another one, I would love to do the Sword in the Stone. Now, Kim, that's put that in my head. I need to go watch that again.
Yeah, let's do it.
Do you have questions, comments, or movie requests? We want to hear from you. Find us on Bluesky and Facebook at SOTSA Podcast. Send us an email to screensofthestoneage@gmail.com or visit our website at screensofthestoneage.com.